G'day, my name's Nigel Withers. I've been living in Sydney for nearly 30 years, and for a bit over 15 years of that time I've gotten around mostly by bicycle. But at the moment I'm in Perth, and I've been here since mid-December. I was originally only going to be here for a month, and I'm now going to be here until the end of March. And what I did when I got here is I bought a bike second hand, just so I'd have something to get around on. And what I've done since then is ridden all over the place, like north, south, east and west, and had a good look at everything that Perth's got to offer. And I've produced nearly 60 videos in that time covering all sorts of aspects of the system. So instead of getting you to watch all 60, I thought I'd just put together a summary of what I've found, and that's what this video is. I've been riding pretty consistently since I got here, and I've now done 51 rides since the 21st of December. Well, at least that's 51 I recorded. That we did go through a lockdown for a week and I didn't record any then. And what I was doing initially was a lot of repetitive rides. I was finding my way around the loop which goes from the CBD down to Fremantle, and I just went around it and around it and around it until I got to know it. Once that was done, I started branching out and exploring different areas, and in some cases I went to suburbs that I knew from when I grew up here, and in other cases I was going to areas that I'd never been before in my entire life. I'm not doing any what I call functional rides over here. I don't need to ride to work. My office is at home essentially here, and I haven't had to do any shopping because I don't have any panniers on my bike here. My Sydney bike is a hybrid with 2 panniers on it, and I often use it for shopping. And also when I'm in Sydney I commute into the CBD for work. So all the riding has been purely for exercise and relaxation, and going out and finding material for these videos. What can we learn from the Perth experience? Some of those rides have been with friends who know their way around, or kind of know their way around, but mostly they've been me just blundering around trying to find a path to somewhere. I'll get up in the morning and I'll go, why don't I go to X today and try and find my way there? And the results have been mixed. Most of those rides have been on grade separated, purpose-built shared paths, or what they call a principal shared path over here, a PSP. They're not pure bike paths. They are all shared with pedestrians. I've not seen a single path. There are some areas, like around the river, where there's enough space to provide a path for pedestrians and a path for cyclists. They're pretty rare. 95%, I guess, of the kilometrage of path I've ridden on has been shared path. That said, when you're out riding in the morning, there's very few pedestrians around a lot of the time, and the distances here are so great that you tend to not see pedestrians on those paths. So yes, they're called a shared path, but in reality they're generally a bike path. I've been usually riding about 50 to 70 kilometres per ride, and I've been trying to hit a target of 300 kilometres per week. And apart from this week, I've hit that pretty much every week. I've done a lot of kilometres since I've been here. Now, what have I discovered since I've been here? There's an absolute ton of off-road, fully separated shared paths, and they go for miles. I actually had trouble when I first got here for the first couple of weeks with my legs cramping about 7 to 8 kilometres into my ride, because I was so used to the stop-start nature of cycling in Sydney, where you go for a little bit and you've got to stop at traffic lights or a stop sign or something or other, and your legs get a little rest. Here you just ride and ride and ride. In fact, the government is putting in an overbridge at the moment. They've got a project that's going to kick off this year, I think sometime, to replace the only spot on the ride between Perth and Rockingham, I think, or Mandurah, where you actually have to cross a road, where you might have to slow down or stop. That's about a 75 kilometre path end to end. So if you're going to ride over here, you've got to get your legs used to just going and going and going. Now, in terms of, like I said, about lack of pedestrians on the paths, the suburbs here tend to be so spread out that walking is a pain. Big blocks. If you want to walk down to the shops, it's a long way. It's why everybody drives everywhere. Perth is an extremely car-centric
city, much more than Sydney is. And it's really only in the inner city areas, the kind of inner ring around the CBD, which is quite small, where you'll actually see people walking into the shops, etc. And that's one reason why I think the shared paths have few pedestrians on them. The distances are really large. So for instance, to go from the CBD down to the bridge over the Canning River, I think is 8 kilometres. And the loop around the river, if you go from, keep going, go to Fremantle, etc., about a 40-kilometre loop. So unless you've got people running marathons, you're not going to see many people on those paths. If you're going to come from the Canning, for instance, you'd get on a bike and ride up to the city, because who's going to walk 8 kilometres one way and 8 kilometres back the other way? It's not like the Bay Run, for instance, where you can do a loop. There are areas where you can do that, and you get a lot more pedestrians in those areas, but they're kind of few and far between. The quality of the paths is definitely a mixed bag, but those that have been built in around the last 10 years or so are of generally uniformly very high quality. Some of them are just astonishing at how good they are. So, and others that are older, older than 10 years or 20 years or going back even 30 years, can be absolute crap. But mostly I've been riding on the good stuff, thank goodness. All the new stuff, it's 3 metres wide from edge to edge. It's usually or often edged with a nice concrete curb. It's not always the case, but a lot of the time it is. It just helps with maintenance, etc. They're all made out of red asphalt, although you will find a bit of concrete in places, but generally you just go for miles on red asphalt. They have consistent line markings down the centre and down the sides. The paths are smooth, they're solid, and they're built on really good foundations, so you don't get ripples and cracks and undulations and all that, potholes and all that kind of horrible stuff. They're well drained, and they're usually well lit. Well, not always. Not every path is lit, but a lot of the paths I've ridden on, the poles are spaced quite close together, the lighting seems to be very good, and you'll see very big drains in the paths where they can't run the water off to the sides. The older paths tend to be much rougher. They might be made out of concrete slabs or black asphalt. They're always less than 3 metres wide, poor markings, that kind of thing. So it goes from really good to pretty crummy, but even the crummy paths are often better than what we get in Sydney. The paths are so well used by cyclists, you have to look both ways at intersections. It's like driving. If you don't look, you will have a crash. Someone will crash into you or you'll crash into them. There are lots of missing links, but those appear to be getting filled in quite a few places. So you'll be riding along a nice asphalt path, you get dumped out on the road for a bit, and then you get back onto a bit of asphalt. Yeah, it happens. Getting around the CBD is definitely a mixed bag. It's great coming into the CBD from some directions, and some of the streets are really well set up to get across the CBD, and others just dump you at an intersection in a WTF moment. It's like, what? Where am I going from here? What am I doing? There's absolutely no indication of what you should be doing. Very confusing. They use a lot of under and over bridges to avoid having to cross busy roads, particularly along the railway line and the freeways. And as a result of all of this, it's much, much safer than getting around in Sydney, and you see a lot more women cycling, either as part of the big training groups that you see racing around every single morning, on their own, in their own groups, just riding casually, on upright bicycles with baskets on the front. I haven't done any statistics, but I think you'll find that there's probably double or triple the proportion of women riding over here. When it gets a bit later in the day, you see a hell of a lot more kids and families cycling around the parks and things like that and on the paths. And they range from quite young kids, much younger than what you'd see, for instance, riding around the Bay Run. It's just so safe. You also see disabled cyclists. I've seen hand cyclists, paraplegics, etc., and tandem bikes where the person on the back is obviously blind. You don't often see that in Sydney unless you go to, I've seen them out in Parramatta Park, for instance, but here, all over the place. They go everywhere I go. Wayfinding, though, is uniformly crap. It just is. The paths are great, the wayfinding is garbage. Finding paths at times can be a real art form because they get hidden so well. And, I could do a number of videos on just how poor the signage is in a lot of places. The other thing you see is almost no one's wearing a fluoro vest. Like, it's when you see someone in fluoro, it's like, oh wow, that's different. Rare as hen's teeth. So outside of the fitness and or sporting groups that you see in the morning, where helmet wearing is obviously compulsory, outside of those groups it seems to be quite optional, and no one bats an eyelid because the paths are so safe. You're not going to get hit by a car. Why wear a helmet? And no one seems to care. It's just like, oh yeah, talkback radio's not full of outraged people at these dangerous cyclists not wearing helmets. Not that I listen to talkback, but that's just the vibe. In general, the government's done a very good job of creating spines running along the freeways and railway lines, but I'm not sure they've done such a good job at creating the secondary feeder routes that connect to those spines. I'm willing to be proven wrong, but so far that's just my experience. When you are riding on the road, and you do have to ride on the road in places to cross these missing links, drivers are so much more relaxed and courteous. It's not funny. There's very little aggro. I don't know whether it's the pace of life over here is slower and more relaxed, but close passes over here are so rare it's not funny. In Sydney, it seems every second bike's got a cyclic camera on it. That's what I've got on mine. Over here, pretty rare. There's just no need for it. Also, policing of cyclists appears to be nearly non-existent. There is no op pedro over here. There are no onerous fines for not having a bell or a helmet. And I think because so many cyclists can use the shared paths instead of the roads, I guess they're out of the public eye, they're under the police radar, and I've even watched the police watch cyclists go through red lights and just don't care. It's like, they're not hurting anybody. Why bother? Now, what lessons can be applied in New South Wales? WA has clearly adopted the Dutch model, and they had a seminar over here, 8 or so years ago, I think, where they brought in some experts. They showed them how it could work. I guess some people might have gone to the Netherlands and had a look. But yeah, they've clearly taken it on. They've gone for consistent infrastructure, and my experience is consistent infrastructure is easy to use infrastructure. It's clear that standards were laid down some years ago, and they've been closely followed across the metro area by multiple councils. Apart from providing a good riding surface, red asphalt is really easy to spot, so if you're blundering around like I am all the time looking for a bike path, you just look for the red asphalt. Most of the time, it's a bike path. Or, a shared path. The build out of the spines, or what you might call long distance cycling highways, or the principal shared paths, makes long distance travel between suburbs or from a distant suburb to the CBD really easy and relatively quick. You can I can average 25 kilometres an hour. There's no stop start cycling, and as I said, you need to get your legs used to spinning for hours at a time. I'll go out and ride for 3 hours, and in that time I might have half a dozen times where I unclip. It takes a bit to condition your legs to get into that kind of state. Using the available space within the railway, freeway and highway corridors has really paid off. Now, again, that would be more difficult in Sydney with smaller corridors, etc., but if there is land that is available to be used, or you can come up with innovative solutions to use what's there, that would really work. To supplement these corridor paths, they've started building alternative routes using existing streets called safe active streets, and I've done some videos on those. They are quite contentious. They have been getting in the paper and getting some negative press, that's for sure. But they're possibly the only answer when a corridor, like along a highway, etc., is not available. They've also put a lot of effort into re-engineering those safe active streets into 30 km/h streets. They don't just stick up some signs saying 30 kilometres an hour. They really restructure the street so you'd naturally drive down it at 30 kilometres an hour. You don't have to look at the speedo. You wouldn't speed. Filling in the missing links is important. There are missing links here, as I mentioned, but they do appear to be working on eliminating them, and I've gone past a couple of construction sites where they seem to be starting work on filling in those missing links. Old paths do need to be rejuvenated to lift them to modern standards, and I've been along two sections of path in the last month where they've been resurfaced. Unfortunately, they don't seem to have bothered to have widened them to the 3 metre standard, but they've certainly gone and relayed the asphalt over the top, and it's nice and smooth and well drained, etc. All the minor design deficiencies in the paths need to be removed, and it's almost unheard of over here to be riding along and suddenly run into a bit of poorly engineered or constructed path that places you at risk. It just almost never happens. Every single element of these paths seems to have been thought through really well, and anything which is problematic, they've just engineered it out. Areas with high pedestrian interaction are covered in green paint. There's lots of warning signs. There's convex mirrors if required to improve visibility. They've really gone all out to make these things safe for everybody. Road crossings need to be engineered out with underpasses or overbridges, and I've done another video on that. And it also flattens out the path as well, so you're not going up and down hills, etc. Traffic lights don't always require a bicycle signal or even a pedestrian signal. You can use common sense to get across a set of lights without dismounting and pushing your bike across, and they've proved that over here. Bells are required equipment, and most of the time over here it's actually for cyclists to warn other cyclists of your approach. There is so much cycle traffic, you need a bell to warn other cyclists of your presence at intersections or when overtaking and blind corners, etc. If you're in Sydney and it's like, bells are a legal requirement, get over it, get over your dislike for bell and get one, and use it. As I said before, fluoro is not required when you build good infrastructure that separates cyclists from vehicles. In fact, over here it actually looks pretty stupid. Every project that's underway at the moment or is finished that I've seen is politically contentious. Local residents over here are no less vitriolic about cycle paths than they are in New South Wales, but the projects still seem to find a way to advance. They might be delayed for a year in some cases, but they somehow finish them. Some councils have a good attitude towards cycle paths, and others are just hopeless. I think you can often spot the boundaries between councils simply by looking at the quality of the path you're on, and there'd be a distinct line, like a razor across the path. And it's like, oh, I've just gone into, Council X, and that's terrible. It's really obvious. Success can be measured via data collection. They've got automated cycle counters everywhere. I think it's like 40 plus. Building a well-drained and grippy path is important. Now, I guess these are the kind of technical issues people don't think about, but you've got to get the surface contoured to allow water to run off. You've got to put in drains where required. Surfaces that provide grip in the wet are vital. And I haven't seen any section of the path that looks like it will turn into a skid pan in the wet. Good wayfinding signage is really important for new cyclists, either people coming from interstate or people that have just taken up cycling and want to use it as an alternative to driving. And that is one area that really lets the system down here. They've really gone in for integration with the train system though. There's big secure bike cages at every station. I mean, it's not parking for 3 bikes, it's parking for 50 plus. And in some cases, I guess that wasn't enough and they've gone and added another cage, I guess because of the demand. And you need to swipe it out with the equivalent of your Opal card, so I guess they're reasonably secure. Every cafe I've been to in every suburb has got bike racks. I'd probably have to go and revisit them and actually check that statement to verify it's true, but it seems there's just bike parking everywhere. Every building you go past has got bike racks out the front. All the offices have them. Shopping centres have got them everywhere. I guess they understand you can't ride without coffee, but I guess the councils have just gone, how many cafes have we got in our council area? Oh, 50, right, roll out 50 sets of bike racks. They don't ask, they just seem to do. And lastly, when you've got private property that extends right down to the waterfront, it is in fact possible to build a raised path or a bridge or a boardwalk around them, and I've done a video on that. I might think of some other things as an addendum, but that'll do for now.